Bernard Manning, Mike Reed, Frank Carson, George Roper, Sid Francis, Dave Butler, Steve Fay, Colin Price, Ken Goodwin, Mike Burton, Dougie Brown, Charlie Williams, and Shep's Banjo Boy.
We had a stage version at the London Palladium, summer shows at Blackpool and Yarmouth, and a record and a book.
It was one of the biggest light entertainment shows on television at that time. It's impossible to underestimate its success and popularity.
In '72, we went out Friday nights at 7:30. The pubs didn't bother open until 8 o'clock. People did not come out until it was finished.
It's 50 years since the comedians first appeared on ITV. I think it was probably Saturday night at 6:30, and massive viewing figures. It was such a new format. It was such a winner. It was just comedians each week standing there telling a joke each and then moving on to the next person.
Johnny Hamp had got the idea of doing the comedians because all the clubs, they all had comedians, and the title's there, isn't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, it's The Comedians!
The comedians. And now, a lot of producers, they phone up, the agents will phone, do you want so-and-so? No, Johnny would go out and look for new people. Anyway, Johnny came to see me and called my agent. He said, yeah, I'll book him. I was on the very first one of the comedians. So I didn't do many, but I did 3 or 4, and it got me going.
It was one of the biggest light entertainment shows on television at that time. It's impossible to underestimate its success and popularity. The other comics, I suppose, would watch the comedian ahead of them performing his stuff. Do you think there was ever an element of them saying, damn it, I've got to cross that out of my spot now. Damn it, he's done that joke as well.
And the teacher went up to him, she went, Mark, because that's his name, said, Mark, she said, if you had 8 sweets and I took 2 away, what would I have? I said, a broken arm.
My brother was in school, the teacher said, now, Johnny, if you had 8 sweeties and I took half of them away, what would I have? He said, a broken arm, miss.
That is enough of that. That is enough of that.
I've got to cross that out of my spot now.
Fellow into his shop, he said, packet of cigarettes. Girl said, yes, sir, plain or filter? He said, filter.
Fellow went to a tobacconist, he said, a packet of cigarettes. He says, 10 or 20? He says, 20.
She said, cork or menthol? He said, cork.
He said, do you want Turkish or Virginia? He says, Virginia.
She said, king size or ordinary? He said, ordinary.
He said, do you want cork tipped or plain? He says, cork tipped.
She said, Virginia or Turkish blend? He said, Virginia.
He said, do you want a soft pack or a hard pack?
She said, flip top or crush-proof pack?
She said, never mind. He said, I've stopped smoking.
He said, forget it, I've chucked it up.
But also, was there rivalry between those comedians at that time?
Do you know that Ken Goodwin has made so much money lately, he's employing Bernard Manning to do his act?
We're having a good time, are
You've seen Bernard Manning on the show many, many times. Dear old Bernard. Tight, always mean. He's mean. Bernard Manning drinks whiskey and Horlicks. When it's his turn to pay, he's asleep.
Tonight is a rather special occasion because tonight is the grand opening of Ray Fell's Wallet.
The comedians tonight were Bernard Manning.
Thank you, Bobby on drums, Tommy on piano. Thank you very much, boys. You worked very hard.
Now, Bernard was what I call a professional and was the best with the timing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Wheel Choppers Working Men's, when we have a grand array of turns for our members tonight.
Because I was 11 when my dad went on the very first one, because we were all very nervous sitting around the TV waiting for it to come on. I had a couple of friends round from school because they couldn't believe my dad was going to be on TV, and I actually remember being really, really scared because I just didn't want my dad to not be funny.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Because you wanted to walk into school with your head held high, didn't you? You wanted, all your pals waiting for the next day, and because obviously the news had gone round that somebody's dad was on telly that night, and I just wanted my dad to put up a good show. You know what I mean?
By the way, pies have come. And they've come on their own, so put plenty of pepper on.
The comedians tonight were Ken Goodwin.
Settle down now.
I remember Ken Goodwin being beautifully naive, and actually it was a nice counterpoint to the other material that a lot of the performers were using within that show.
Don't you set me off, you.
Nice piece of casting.
I get bellyache when I start. I think that's my sister over there.
I'm 61 now, so I would have been 11. My hero, he still is, and I miss him so much. I really do. Got that lovely photo of Dad and Mum, and when we're both on there.
A little girl told me a good gag the other day.
When I used to do stories in school, and I remember Dad reading one and cracking up, and he actually used it in one of his gags.
She said, what would you do if you got charged by a herd of wild elephants? I said, I don't know. What would you do? She said, jump into the nearest phone box and dial trunk and reverse the charge.
Did it on telly, and I said, no, I said that in my story. That was hilarious.
I'm too good for this place, aren't I?
Linda's older. She's 2.5 years older than me. The first day he went away in Chester, I went off in his car and we were crying and waving him off, and it was awful, but, you know, he went on to be the star he was.
Did you see that then? That must have been funny.
Asked my friend home once for tea, and Dad came in, and she said after, oh, he's just like a daddy. I always remember her saying that, Mum did. I thought it was very sweet, because she expected him to be this, you know, star. And my friend said, he's just like a daddy, and I thought he's my daddy.
What about that fella that went to the doctors and he said about those tablets you gave me to keep my strength up, I can't get the top off the bottle.
The comedians tonight were Dougie Brown.
I was a trainee camera operator. I joined in November 1968. My memory is literally the fact that it was the first recording, and obviously it was new. It was hysterically funny, a lot of the jokes. But that particular show was when Dougie Brown told the joke about the plumber who'd come to mend the pipes.
He said, it's the plumber I've come to mend your pipes, would let me in, please. And then the parrot said, who is it? He said, it's the plumber I've come to mend your pipes, would let me in, please. And then the parrot said, who is it?
He was so good at doing it, perhaps that's why he eventually became an actor anyway.
He said, it's the plumber I've come to mend your pipes, and then
But it was just funny. I mean, that is my memory, that it was very funny.
who is it? It's the plumber I've come to mend your pipes.
Everybody, it seemed to me, was so convulsed with laughter. You know, when you're standing behind one of those big Vinton pedestal cameras, you had to be steady.
I was doing right well as well then, wasn't I know all the characters, like, do you want to dance? You can dance.
I mean, it was comics pulled out of the local northern clubs, and in a sense that was a local phenomenon, wasn't it? And they were blokes who just worked their way around the different clubs. They had their own little routines, and in a sense they weren't exposed. But once they were on television, once they came into the studio, they used to draw lots who was going on first, and whoever went on last was virtually wetting themselves, because there was a real chance they wouldn't have a joke left.
The parrot said,
Well, it was comedy, the like of which we'd never seen before, and it reduced us to tears of laughter.
He went on for about 4.5 hours and he's screaming and shouting his head off, and in the end the blood pressure got the better of him. And he collapsed in a heap on the stairs, and at 5 o'clock the man came home from work. Well, he fell right over this body, and he looked down and he said, who is it? And the parrot said, it's the plumber he's put him in.
mean, it was a cracking show. It really was.
The comedians tonight were Dougie Brown, Frank Carson. Frank Carson.
Frank Carson was lovely. I went down to his dressing room with another of the dancers, Jean, my friend. I don't know how this all happened, but we used to go in there, knock on the door, and he'd start talking silly to us. And then we'd memorise it. Vij non Karen San, Simurai Su, shampoo. And once we had that, it was like medicine, and then we just went away again. Oh dear, it was funny.
I haven't spoken to my wife for 11 months. Didn't like to interrupt her.
Frank Carson is the way I tell him.
She talks through her nose, you know, her mouth's worn out.
I knew him for years and years and years and years. We did a radio series together called The Gag Crackers Ball. I'm doing a nudist camp, he said. He said, the fellow walking looking over the nudist camp wall, and he said, they're full of people with no clothes on. He said, are they men or women? He said, I can't tell, they've got no clothes on. Well, I said, you can't do that, Frank. He said, just watch me. And he bloody did. And he got a laugh with it.
That's the way I tell him, isn't it?
We were in a working men's club, and I'd gone in and taken my mother with me, and I'm in the dressing room, and Frank came walking in, and he looked at me, and he'd worked with me before, and he opened the door and he shouted, "Oh no, you've put me on with this girl singer that digs a hole for the comedian. She's dreadful. You can't put me on with her." And people were looking, and then he came and said, "Hello, Sandra, how are you doing? Lovely to see you." I said it was his silly sense of humour.
I should have read you this letter earlier on, actually. It's from my mother. She says, "Dear Frank, you've now been away for 3 weeks, and we thought you were still in the lavatory." The insurance man called this morning and said, "If the last instalment on your granny's funeral isn't paid, up she comes."
I did the Somerset's show in Blackpool, another one at the Grand Theatre with Frank Carson. And he would be outside the theatre in his stage clothes, whatever he was wearing that for the show, half an hour before the show, where people were coming in. And as they were coming in, he'd be walking up there, "Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Carson, Nicky Nacky Noo. I'm the funniest man on the planet. Don't be bothered going to see those other shows on the pier. You come in here and have a look at me. If you want a good laugh, Frank Carson, news at 10, and he would be out there. It was unbelievable. And then when he'd done his show, he'd walk out of the interval, ice cream concessions. I've got advising them which ice creams to order. And at the end, he'd be standing at the gate waving them all goodbye. I've never seen anything like it for his energy.
Fellow on board the ship one night, and he's just going to fall asleep, and he hears pot, 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 and he jumps out, switches the light on, and he can see nothing. He says, "A haunted ship." So he's just getting back into the bed, and he's falling asleep, and he hears pot, 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 pot. He jumps out of bed, and he switches on. Nothing. He can see nothing. So he gets frightened, you see, says a few prayers, and stands beside the light, switches it off, and he hears pot, 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 pot. He switches on the light, and it's a mouse running along the hot pipe, and it's going pot, 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 pot.
Frank Carson, George Roper. Fellow went to the doctor, said, "Doctor, you having half a feeling?" He says, "I feel like a pair of curtains." The doctor says, "Get on, man, pull yourself together." Father said to his little son the other week, he said, "Now listen, isn't it about time we had a talk about the facts of life?" Little lad said, "Well, what do you want to know, Dad?"
One of the really nice things about my dad was that he was always home, you know, he was never away. We grew up in the countryside. I think we moved out to Cheshire near the M6 because it was easier for him to get up and around the country.
Cheshire. Oh, bit of class here at Cheshire.
My dad, as you know, was very outgoing. He would stop and talk to everyone.
Good lad he is.
I can remember feeling quite clearly that, you know, he was obviously somebody of interest.
You're enjoying yourself tonight, pet, aren't you? Where you from, chicken? Where you from, darling? Stockport. Scruffy place, then.
I remember once going to, he took me down to the Tower of London. Just, you know, we were on a tourist trip to London. I wanted to go and see all the sights, and I would have been 7 or 8 years old. And we went went to the Tower of London, and one of the beefeaters there walked straight up to my dad and said, "Hello, George, how are you doing?" And I was just, blown away by this, that one of the Queen's yeomen of the guard was knew who my dad was.
A load of bloody rubbish that was, wasn't it? Must tell you this one. Fellow walked into Woolworths. He said, "I want some underwear." I said, "Certainly, sir. Would you like some X fronts, Y fronts, or R fronts?" He said, "What's R fronts?" He said, "Try a pair." He put them on and went,
George Roper, Sid Francis.
I worked with Sid at the Derngate in Northampton in pantomime 2002 into 2003. Sid was playing the Dane. It was Jack and the Beanstalk. It's actually said on the poster, Sid Francis of the Comedians, which had been like 30 years before on ITV. He was clearly still using that connection.
Did you get to speak to them before or after? Did you find them to be agreeable gents? Were they amusing?
Yes, there were some lovely ones that stick in my mind. I mean, for example, Colin Crompton.
Colin Crompton.
Colin was lovely because he was so generous. I mean, if you went out and having a drink in a pub, Colin would always want to get his wallet out and pay.
And I couldn't come dashing on tonight because I went to a party last night and had too much ale. It was a special occasion. It was my granddad's 103rd birthday party. He wasn't there. He died when he was 29.
He was such an agreeable fellow with that splay of hair across that bald pate of his.
I always feel sorry for people who don't drink, me. If you know anybody who doesn't drink, feel sorry for them, because when they wake up in the morning, that's the best they're going to feel all day.
He did have a terrible suit, and I'm sure it's in some photos, and it was like this almost rusty, kind of orangey, reddy kind of coloured suit, and I can still picture it, really. My Uncle Neil and my dad used to tell us the story of how he started off working in the bank, and he used to tell jokes to some of the customers, and he got in trouble for it at the bank, and the bank gave him an ultimatum, and they said, "You've either got to stop with the jokes and all the rest of it, or you can leave." So he chose to leave.
A normal brother, I suppose, at the time. We didn't regard him as anything special. He started worked in Martin's Bank, if you remember Martin's Bank. While he was still in the banking, he went in for competitions in the early 50s. When you work in the bank, you weren't supposed to work anywhere else, so they called him in and he had a word, and he said, "Well, I earned more for that one show than you're paying me for a month." But then he toured all these third-rate theatres, you know, with, I suppose, third-rate shows, you could call it. But they called them reviews, and of course, then Colin made most of his money in the clubs. In those days, there were 600 venues in the Manchester district where they had artists on. You know, when I started coaching and whatnot, and we had nowhere else to go, we used to say, "Well, our kid's on at such a place, we'll go and see him." And although you were supposed to be a member of the club he was at, he used to walk in and say, "I'm with the artist," and we just used to go in and sit on the artist table near the stage.
And obviously he must have been doing the club circuits for quite some time before, like you say, before the comedians came about.
There were two kids at school. They started school when they were 5, and they hated each other from the word go, and they went through all the schools together, hating each other, through public school, university, the lot, and they still hated each other. And when they left, one of them went into the church and became a bishop, and the other one went in the Navy and became an admiral. And they never met for about 40 years, and they were both on Euston Station in London, and the niggle was still there. They still thought about it, and the bishop went up to the admiral, said, "Excuse me, porter, what time's the next train for Manchester?" And the admiral looked at the bishop and he said, "6 o'clock, madam."
So it's not necessarily the most conventional of upbringings, but then people at school would be like, "What's it like having a famous dad? What's, traditional?" I'd be like, "Well, we don't know any different. He's just our dad, really." He was embarrassing. He'd have friends around and he'd say, Oh, she is quite pretty, Cheryl. I don't know why you didn't say she was.
It's time to think of holidays now, though, isn't it? Getting on holidays. I went to Spain last year, a place called Costa Packet.
Yeah, he'd always come out with these little one-liners and we'd be like rolling our eyeballs.
A pal of mine went to one of them holiday camps, all these fellas in blazers dashing about all day to make sure that you enjoy yourself, and same fellas dashing about all night to make sure that you don't enjoy yourself.
People were being quite mean to us and saying things like, oh, your dad's just stupid. He said to us, turn around and say to them next time they say that, he gets paid for it, what's your excuse?
Jackie Hamilton was just the funniest man in the world. He was just hysterical.
But even the kids in Liverpool are funny. The kids. That's where the humour stems from, children and old folk. My little fella, he came in the other day, he said, hey, Dad. I said, what is it, lad? He said, that teacher. I'm sure she fancies me. I said, the teacher fancies you? How do you make that out? He said, well, she keeps putting kisses next to me sums.
Literally in Liverpool, you can actually just say a punchline and everyone will fall about laughing because they remember Jackie so well.
But the Liverpool people, you see, we can't understand sophisticated jokes. Only happens with the Liverpool fellas. We can't get them. We like daft ones that we know. Went to two photographers with a photograph of his dad. He said, I want this photograph of my dad reproducing. But I want you to do him without the bowler hat. So his dad had a bowler hat on. And the photographer, being very obliging, he went, yes, sir, certainly, sir, yes, sir. I think we can manage that, sir. And just as he was going on, he said, oh, by the way, sir, what way did your father have his hair parted? He said, well, you know that when you take the bowler hat off.
Jackie was the epitome of Scouse coming.
Also on the show was Shep's Banjo Boys. They topped and tailed the show. Very lively, straw hats, striped blazers, that sort of thing.
I used to watch the comedians with my dad, who used to laugh his socks off, but for me the highlight was watching Howard Shepherd and Shep's Banjo Boys doing their intro and the fill-ins during the show. When I first saw Shep's Banjo Boys on the television, and I thought they were absolutely fabulous. So the music of Shep's Banjo Boys carries on these days through not only myself and some other fans, but also some of my students. And I always say, well, if you want to see something good, have a look on YouTube or a DVD, or try to find one of the old LPs and get one of the old Shep's Banjo Boys albums. You won't go too far wrong.
Well, Johnny Hamp, who was a producer of the comedians, he used to do a programme called, not Come Dancing, but something similar to that, from Bellevue.
Let's Dance, one of those, ballroom dancing programmes.
That said, we'll take the banjos down and see if we can get John to listen to us play the banjo, which we did a couple of times.
Howard has always been a very persistent guy. He found out that I was making the show there, and he came over with his dad. He asked me to audition them, which I did.
Yeah, very nice. And that's how we first came across Johnny. Yeah.
But I didn't use them for another 10 years.
Never used us. We thought we got on Granada scene at 6:30.
Howard had put together a band, and they were working at the Golden Garter.
This Johnny Hamp came up with his wife, and said, I think I've got something for you that you might be interested in.
Johnny Hamp, who's producer of Light Entertainment at Granada, who, by the way, first put the Beatles on television in 1963 or something. I can't remember. But nice guy. Offered the band the gig at with the comedians, a show that was he was producing.
He said, what I'm thinking of, I'm doing a show of stand-up comics.
And I invited them to come on the comedians. And of course they were on the whole of the series, which ran from about 1971 to about 1985.
So as the pianist, you were sort of set towards the back, but before I knew you, I was always aware, watching Shep's Banjo Boys on TV, of your presence. How did you manage to make that happen?
The drummer, lovely John Ronings, the drummer, and we were right at the very back, and then halfway between them and the front row, which was the three banjos, you had the trombone and the sousaphone, so we were a 7-piece band. And John and I at the back there, we used to even talk to the cameramen. We get some close-ups, not realising, of course, it was someone like Catherine Evans, or Catherine Rand as she was then, in the vision mixing box that will be deciding what goes out, and nothing to do with the performance at all.
Yeah, but also you are still a very flamboyant pianist. I mean, there's lots of standing up, lots of arm work, isn't there?
I just had one eye on the piano and the other eye was always on the monitor in the studio, because I'm thinking, I'm going to stand up and take a bow at the end of this number and put my arms out. And if you look at any of the clips on YouTube of the band on the Comedians, you'll see at the end of the number, I'll be up there like a shot off the piano stool, trying to get some applause and doing the eyes and teeth, you know, and hoping for a close-up.
There were only 3 channels back then. Reality TV wasn't a thing, and my dad was the only person in Romilly, the village where we lived, who was on the box. He was a charismatic and entertaining man by nature anyway, but the Comedians made him a local celebrity, and people gravitated to him. We adored him, and we were so very proud to be his daughters. We still are. With age, we've come to fully appreciate just how difficult it is to play music. Any instrument, not just one you have to blow into, takes years of dedication, and in our eyes he was the best. But obviously he was best known as a brass player, with his signature sousaphone as the backdrop to the title of the show. As we were only 4 and 5 back in 1971, my sister Claire and I didn't see the Comedians when it first aired. We probably wouldn't have been allowed to watch it because Daddy as he was back then, even though they would have gone over our heads, didn't think most of the jokes were suitable for his little girls. But the Comedians meant we grew up understanding that, you know, our dad was special. I'll always be grateful to the Comedians. The show preserved Dad's memory not just for me, but for my sisters Claire and Sarah, and all our kids and generations to come. It's given us precious footage of the man that we loved the most doing the thing that he loved the most, which was playing the sousaphone.